Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Dark Secrets. Tonight, we set foot into one of the harshest realms on Earth, a place where death lurks at every turn and survival is never promised. 10 climbers believed they were ready to conquer the ultimate challenge when they set out on Denali, North America's tallest and most unforgiving peak. What awaited them instead was no triumph, but a frozen nightmare that turned ambition into horror. These are not stories of victory, but chilling accounts of those who discovered that Denali does not just test a climber's strength, it breaks it completely. From skilled mountaineers who vanished into the storm without a trace to expedition leaders carrying decisions that would haunt them forever. The truth you're about to hear is darker than anyone imagined. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Secrets for daily true horror stories that will keep you awake long after the lights go out. And don't forget to hit the notification bell, because when the shadows call, you'll want to be the first to hear them. Now, let us journey into the icy void of Alaska's wilderness where civilization ends and terror begins. For Diane Mitchell, the dream began at 12 years old. He would stare at his father's mountaineering magazines, transfixed by the towering image of Denali. By 1967, at just 24 years old, Diane had finally saved enough to join Joe Wilcox's ambitious expedition to North America's highest summit. But what should have been the adventure of a lifetime would spiral into the deadliest disaster in Denali's history, one that claimed 7 lives in a storm meteorologists later described as the worst to strike the peak in more than a century. The Wilcox expedition was a patchwork team of 12 men from across the United States, ranging from 22 to 31 years of age. Most had been drawn in by Wilcox's ad, tempted by the modest $300 cost that covered food and gear. Diane, an engineering student from Colorado, had plenty of rocky mountain climbs behind him, but nothing close to Denali's deadly heights of 20,810 feet. Even before the climb began, the Park Service questioned the team's chances. Rangers warned of the group's inexperience at extreme altitudes and advised Wilcox to merge with Howard Snyder's more seasoned Colorado team. When an injury left Snyder's team too small to climb alone, the merger became inevitable. Together, 12 men would attempt Denali's north side via the remote Muldrow Glacier route, cheaper but far more dangerous than the West Buttress. On June 2nd, the climb began. Immediately, the brutal reality of high-altitude life set in. Headaches, nausea, fatigue. Still, the group pressed on, building camp after camp across the unforgiving slopes. By July 13th, they had reached 15,000 feet. Preparing for the final push to the top. Weather forecasts promised clear skies. But on Denali, forecasts are often a cruel trick. Some even whispered that rangers had warned of a storm forming, one that could strike by July 16th. On July 15th, 4 men set out from high camp at 18,000 feet: Joe Wilcox, Howard Snyder, Jerry Lewis, and Paul Schlichter. Against all odds, they reached the summit by evening. The view was breathtaking. Calm skies, near-perfect visibility, and biting cold at 6 degrees Fahrenheit. For nearly 90 minutes, they stood on top of North America. But little did they know, the mountain was simply allowing them a fleeting victory before unleashing its full wrath. The next day, violent winds over 70 miles per hour slammed into the mountain, trapping all 12 men in their tents. It was as if Denali itself was issuing a warning. By July 17th, the winds eased. 7 climbers, including Diane, prepared to summit under Jerry Clark's leadership, while others began their descent. But mistakes were already being made. Clark's team didn't leave until 3 p.m., a dangerously late start that meant they'd be caught high on the mountain as night swallowed the slopes. At 8:30 that evening, Clark's voice crackled over the radio. His words carried unease. Dense fog had engulfed the upper slopes, reducing visibility to nothing. The climbers were trapped with almost no food, No tents and only a handful of sleeping bags. Their rapid ascent plan had collapsed. Now, it was a fight for survival. The next morning, July 18th, Clark made his final transmission. 5 men, including Diane, had reached the summit, fulfilling their dream. But their reality was far from glorious. Temperatures plummeted, winds howled, and a total whiteout swallowed the peak. Clark promised they would descend within minutes and check in later that night. That call never came, because as they signed off, a monster was already taking shape above them, a storm so catastrophic that it would erase 7 men from the face of the earth, leaving only questions, fragments, and frozen echoes behind. The aftermath of the 1967 Wilcox disaster was not just about grief. It became a storm of blame and controversy. Many pointed fingers at Joe Wilcox himself. As expedition leader, critics accused him of poor judgment, allowing a late summit start, choosing to merge with the more experienced Colorado group instead of waiting for his own, and failing to order a full retreat before the storm struck. For years, Wilcox carried that unbearable weight, convinced that his choices had led 7 young men to their deaths. But when meteorologists finally completed their extensive studies, the truth was undeniable. The storm that descended on Denali that July was so brutal, so catastrophic, that no leader could have saved the team once it struck. These climbers were not victims of arrogance or poor planning. They were victims of nature's most merciless fury. The 1967 Wilcox disaster remains the deadliest in Denali's history and one of the most haunting tragedies in all of mountaineering. 7 men swallowed in a single storm. Their loss shook the climbing world to its core, forcing sweeping changes in expedition safety. Weather forecasts became stricter, communication protocols more advanced, and emergency procedures were redesigned, all because of the lessons carved into that mountain by blood and ice. For Diane Mitchell, the boy who once dreamed of Denali as a child, the dream ended not in triumph at the summit, but in a frozen nightmare that claimed his life. His body, along with those of Jerry Clark and John McLaughlin, still rests somewhere on the mountain's upper slopes, forever entombed by the great one. The tragedy endures as a chilling reminder. Even perfect preparation is powerless when nature chooses to unleash its wrath. In time, the families of the fallen found some measure of peace. They came to accept that their loved ones had not perished from recklessness, but in pursuit of a dream that demanded everything. Denali had become their final resting place, a silent monument to both human ambition and the terrifying power of the natural world. In the history of climbing, the Wilcox expedition remains a stark warning. Some challenges extract the ultimate price, no matter how much courage or skill is brought to the fight. But Denali's legacy of death didn't end in 1967. Decades later, the mountain would again become the stage for something even darker, something no one had ever imagined possible. Indiana, Mercer had been guiding expeditions on Denali for over a decade. By 2018, he had seen every kind of climber, from eager novices to hardened professionals. But nothing could prepare him for Marcus Webb, a 36-year-old investment banker from Chicago who arrived that May with secrets buried beneath his polished exterior. At first glance, Webb seemed like another wealthy client, eccentric, perhaps, but harmless. He paid double the standard fee for a private ascent and demanded total discretion about his identity. Yet the deeper Mercer looked, the more the cracks appeared. Webb's gear was brand new, untouched, tags still hanging. He claimed years of mountaineering experience, but couldn't answer simple questions about past climbs. His lack of basic skills, tying harnesses, reading altitude, using crampons, betrayed the truth. This man had no business being on Denali. As their climb began, Mercer's unease grew. Webb constantly checked his satellite phone, snapping at poor signal, clutching multiple devices that weighed him down. At night, Mercer overheard disturbing fragments of whispered conversations. "The problem will be solved permanently. No one will ever find anything up here." Webb brushed it off when confronted, but Mercer's instincts screamed danger. By May 12th, another climbing party had joined their route. Sarah Chung, a Seattle biochemist, and her partner James Morrison. Morrison was struggling with altitude sickness, forcing Sarah into a heartbreaking choice: abandon her summit attempt or continue without him. With rangers arranging his descent, Sarah reluctantly pressed forward with Mercer's group. Webb's reaction was immediate and unsettling. He fixated on Sarah, peppering her with invasive questions about her research, her family, and her life back home. What began as casual curiosity turned into something darker. Webb lingered near her tent, offered unnecessary help, and eavesdropped on her calls. Indiana Mercer, seasoned enough to recognize real danger, realized Sarah was being hunted not by the mountain, but by the man who claimed to be her climbing companion. By the time they reached 14,000 feet, Webb's behavior had spiraled into obsession. He tampered with Sarah's pack, removing crucial safety gear, and lied about reorganizing equipment. When Mercer postponed the summit for safety, Webb erupted in rage, threatening lawsuits and accusing the guide of sabotage. Then Sarah uncovered something chilling: a recording device, still running, hidden in Webb's jacket. That night, during the storm, Webb made his move. At 17,000 feet, with wind screaming through camp, he crept into Sarah's tent with a syringe in hand. Her screams tore through the darkness as Mercer rushed in. A brutal fight erupted, two men locked in a deadly struggle on the edge of a glacier, where one slip meant death. As Webb dangled over the abyss, the truth finally spilled out. He wasn't Marcus Webb at all. His real name, Vincent Crawford, a fugitive tied to 3 unsolved murders across Colorado and Wyoming. Sarah was to be his 4th victim, chosen for her wealth and isolation. Crawford had plotted for months, believing Denali's unforgiving wilderness would conceal his crime forever. Mercer held his client's life in his grip, literally. But faced with the confession of a serial predator and the threat he posed, the guide made a choice that would haunt him forever. He let go. Crawford's scream was swallowed by the storm, his body lost in the ice. The mountain had claimed another life, but this time, it was not Denali's wrath alone that decided it. What investigators uncovered later would chill them to the core. Audio recordings of Crawford's plans, proof of his stalking Sarah for months, and chilling echoes of his previous crimes. For the first time in Denali's history, rangers classified a death not as an accident, but as a murder attempt thwarted by fate and a guide's impossible decision. 3 weeks after Crawford's deadly fall, improved weather finally allowed search teams to deploy helicopters across the lower slopes of Denali's high camp. What they discovered was chilling. At the base of a 1,000-foot cliff lay Crawford's body, his remains shattered from the impact. Yet investigators quickly noticed something strange. His scattered equipment and the condition of his body suggested a far more complicated end. Some experts believe Crawford might have still been alive when he reached the ground, only to succumb later to the brutal cold. Indiana Mercer soon found himself under intense scrutiny. Federal investigators and park rangers pressed him for every detail, determined to establish whether Crawford's death was murder, justifiable homicide, or self-defense. Sarah Chen's testimony, combined with evidence of a violent struggle and Crawford's attempted assault, supported Indiana's account. In the end, prosecutors ruled that Indiana had acted appropriately, protecting not only himself but Sarah from a fugitive with lethal intent. But while the legal chapter closed, the psychological aftermath was far darker. Indiana wrestled with guilt for letting Crawford go instead of attempting a rescue. Sarah, meanwhile, required months of therapy to confront the trauma of nearly being murdered during what was supposed to be a victorious climb. Both survivors knew their lives would never be the same. The Crawford case shocked the mountaineering community, It was the first confirmed attempt at premeditated murder on Denali. New safety protocols were enforced, stricter background checks on clients, and specialized training for guides to identify human threats. That went beyond avalanches, altitude, or storms. Because, as this case revealed, the deadliest danger could be the person sharing your tent, your rope, even your trust. For Indiana Mercer, the 2018 season was his last. Though cleared of wrongdoing, he could no longer find peace in the mountains he once called home. Denali, once a sanctuary, had transformed into a haunting reminder of the darkness men could carry into untouched wilderness. He left guiding behind, relocating to the lower 48, where he now trains law enforcement in climbing safety using his harrowing experience with Crawford to teach others how to detect predators in the wild. Crawford's death ensured Denali was never stained with its first successful murder. But it proved something else. Evil can climb as high as the human spirit dares to go. Even in the most remote corners of the earth, there is no escape from the darkness within. The following year, June 14, 2019, brought an entirely different kind of horror. At Denali National Park's Emergency Communication Center, veteran operator Jalen Hartwell was conducting her morning weather briefing when a distress call cut through the static. She had handled thousands of emergencies during her 8 years at the post-routine evacuations, brutal avalanches, multi-day rescue missions. But nothing in her experience could prepare her for what was about to unfold. The voice belonged to a man in his late 20s or early 30s, with a faint southern accent, distorted by static. He identified himself as Kevin Morrison. His claim was chilling. He and 3 other climbers were stranded at 19,000 feet on Denali's south face, an area considered inaccessible, even impossible, without specialized gear. Morrison described the nightmare. An avalanche had stripped them of most equipment, leaving them marooned on a narrow ledge with no way down. 2 were gravely injured, one with a shattered leg, another showing signs of severe altitude sickness. Morrison pleaded for immediate helicopter rescue. Though his coordinates placed him on a sheer vertical wall, no place for a helicopter to land. Hartwell launched standard protocols, pressing for an expedition permit and details of their route. Morrison grew evasive, insisting time was slipping away. More troubling, he couldn't answer basic questions any climber should know: the names of established camps, the route he'd taken. Helicopter reconnaissance was launched. What they found was unnerving. The snow was pristine, untouched. No tracks, no abandoned gear, no avalanche scars. Records showed no climbing permits issued to anyone named Kevin Morrison that season. And yet, his panic transmissions continued by midday. His desperation deepened, claiming one teammate had already frozen to death. His voice carried raw panic, the kind seasoned radio operators recognized as authentic. Search teams expanded their reach, but GPS confirmed Morrison's coordinates led to an impossibly sheer wall where no human could stand. Then things grew stranger. In later calls, Morrison described storms and blizzards, while weather stations recorded calm, clear skies. His voice betrayed no weakness, despite supposedly spending 11 days at extreme altitude with little food or water. The final blow came when investigators checked archives. Kevin Morrison was real, but he wasn't alive. He had disappeared in 1987 during a solo attempt on Denali's south face 32 years earlier. His body was never found. Still, the calls persisted. And with each transmission, the impossible became harder to ignore. In the aftermath of the Morrison mystery, Denali's communication center was never the same. Several seasoned operators quietly requested transfers, admitting they could no longer maintain the cold detachment required to decide whether a call was real or the echo of something unexplainable. The phantom radio phenomenon remains under active investigation by the National Park Service. New protocols now require every strange transmission to be logged, analyzed, and digitally archived. Equipment across the park has been upgraded with recording systems to capture not only voices, but technical data to ensuring no detail of these haunting broadcasts slips away. Radio operators are now trained in the history of phantom calls, taught to separate true distress from signals that defy explanation. The case of Kevin Morrison stands as a chilling reminder. Even in an age of advanced technology, not every mystery can be unraveled. Were these transmissions nothing more than freak atmospheric interference? Elaborate hoaxes? Or did they hint at something that science still cannot grasp? Whatever the truth, the voices highlighted the terrifying isolation of Denali, where climbers already battle nature's extremes, and sometimes their grip on reality itself. For Jalen Hartwell, the burden was too heavy. Haunted by the thought of dismissing a real emergency, she stepped away from her career in emergency communications. Yet even after her transfer, she often returned to the frequencies in her spare hours, listening for voices that shouldn't exist, calling from ledges where no human could survive. And disturbingly, the phantom transmissions did not stop. They continued to bleed through the static, desperate pleas for rescue from coordinates where only ghosts could climb. But Denali was not finished with its horrors. On April 22, 2021, another tragedy would strike the mountain with catastrophic force. This time, the nightmare came not from phantom voices, but from ice and stone themselves. Kane Rodriguez had faced avalanches before. In her 15-year career, she had survived 3 near-death encounters with walls of snow. But nothing could have prepared her for what was about to unfold at Denali's advanced base camp. That morning, a collapse unlike anything recorded in modern history would bury her entire Team 8 fellow researchers beneath a torrent of ice. Rodriguez, a respected glaciologist and avalanche specialist, had carefully studied the snowpack. The camp's position seemed safe, shielded from obvious slide zones, reinforced by data and decades of precedent. She had confidence in the science. But Denali has never bowed to human certainty. The International Alpine Research Expedition had arrived at Kahila Base Camp just 12 days earlier, a collaboration of 4 nations determined to study how climate change was reshaping high-altitude glacial systems. Their team was elite: atmospheric scientists, medical specialists, seasoned mountaineers. Among them, Rodriguez carried the responsibility of avalanche safety. Her experience was vast, her assessments methodical. And yet, in the early hours of April 22nd, the mountain revealed its most violent face at 3:47 a.m. The silence of Denali was shattered by a low, rumbling roar, deep and primal, as though the earth itself was breaking apart. A hanging glacier high above the camp sheared away in a single catastrophic collapse. Over 50,000 tons of ice tore free, dragging neighboring cliffs down with it. What followed was not a typical avalanche, but a chain reaction of destruction, an unstoppable white tsunami. Rodriguez's instincts kicked in. She grabbed her beacon, screamed warnings into the night. But there was no time. Within moments, a wall of snow, taller than a 10-story building, was racing toward camp with the speed of a freight train. Her last memory before the impact was the sight of a roaring white wall devouring everything in its path. When it struck, the avalanche ripped the camp from the glacier. Tents and equipment hurled hundreds of yards before being swallowed whole. The force was apocalyptic. For Rodriguez, survival was a mix of instinct and impossible luck. Her tent, pitched on the edge of the camp, was spared the avalanche's full fury. Instead of being crushed, she was thrown violently downslope, entombed beneath 6 feet of compacted snow. For 26 agonizing hours, she lay buried alone, disoriented, fighting to breathe in a space no larger than her body. The silence pressed against her ears, broken only by her ragged breathing and the slow settling of ice. She tried calling out. No one answered. In the dark, the realization dawned. She might be the only one left alive. When rescuers finally reached her on April 23rd, guided by the faint signal of her avalanche transceiver, they uncovered a woman battered, hypothermic, but alive. Her first words were desperate questions about her teammates. The rescuers had no answers. The search for the remaining 8 lasted 5 more days. Over 50 personnel scoured the debris, probing through an estimated 75,000 tons of ice and snow. Not a single body was ever recovered. Investigators later admitted the truth. No warning signs could have predicted a collapse of that magnitude. It was an event beyond models, beyond precedent. An avalanche so massive, it redrew the boundaries of what experts thought possible on Denali. Rodriguez survived, but at a terrible cost. Her physical recovery took months. Her emotional scars, however, never healed. She walked away from mountaineering, unable to return to the peaks that had defined her life. The mountains had given her purpose, and then taken everything else. The Denali avalanche of April 22, 2021, still stands as the deadliest avalanche ever recorded on the mountain, a cataclysm that exposed just how fragile our scientific understanding of glacier stability really is in a warming world. The disaster forced sweeping changes to safety protocols and spurred the development of new real-time monitoring technologies. Yet, beyond the academic reports and policy revisions, the tragedy left behind 8 empty spaces, scientists and mountaineers whose brilliance was silenced in seconds. It was a grim lesson. No matter how prepared or experienced, even the best can be reduced to victims when the mountain decides otherwise. For survivor Callan Rodriguez, survival came with a cruel price. She alone carried the memory of her team's final moments, the destruction of her life's work, the screams swallowed by snow, and the crushing knowledge that she was the only witness to a tragedy no one thought possible on Denali's slopes. But Denali's darkness did not stop there. Just 1 year earlier, in 2020, another expedition had uncovered a horror of a different kind. This one born not of nature's fury, but of human malice. Among the group was Janae Thompson, a world-class rope specialist. Her mastery of anchors and rescue systems had saved lives on climbs across the globe. When she joined the Denali International Expedition, her teammates believed she was their strongest safeguard against danger. What none of them could have imagined was that their expedition would become the scene of the first documented case of deliberate sabotage and attempted murder on Denali. The expedition, organized by Alpine Adventures International, was no casual tourist climb. Their chosen route, the infamous Cassin Ridge, was notorious for its steep ice walls and unforgiving technical demands. Here, trust wasn't just important, it was everything. One weak link, one error in judgment, and death was certain. From the start, tensions brewed. Marcus Webb, a wealthy New York banker who had bought his way onto the climb, clashed constantly with Dr. Sarah Chun, a quiet but capable scientist. Webb was impatient, reckless, and obsessed with summit glory. Chun, by contrast, insisted on caution and safety. Their opposing philosophies poisoned team unity, and Webb's condescending arrogance only deepened the divide. What no one realized was that Webb's hostility would go far beyond words. On the night of June 15th, while his teammates slept at 14,000 feet, Webb crept into the equipment tent. With surgical precision, he pulled out Chun's rope and used a blade to make small, near-invisible cuts into its sheath and core. The sabotage was flawless, undetectable in routine inspections, but fatally designed to snap under real stress. The next morning, June 16th, the team began climbing the Cassin Ridge's technical crux. As Chun worked her way across a delicate stretch of thin ice, her foothold gave way. She fell a fall her rope should have caught. Instead, the line ripped apart where Webb had sliced it. Before anyone could react, Chun plummeted uncontrollably down the face, striking rock and ice in a devastating cascade that her teammates scrambled to save her. Against all odds, Chun was still alive, battered but conscious. When Janae examined the shredded rope, her stomach sank. This wasn't equipment failure. It was murder disguised as an accident. Chun herself confirmed chilling details. She remembered Webb insisting on helping with the ropes the night before. She recalled the strange stiffness in her line that morning. And as rescuers fought for 8 grueling hours to raise her broken body out of the crux, Webb seemed disturbingly indifferent, focused more on schedules and summit prospects than the teammate whose life had hung in the balance. When investigators later analyzed the rope Janae had preserved, their worst fears were confirmed. The cuts were deliberate. Webb, drowning in gambling debts and fraudulent schemes, had been trying to eliminate Chun, whose financial success made her a tempting target. Fingerprints, forged documents, and witness accounts painted a picture of a man desperate enough to kill. But fate intervened. On the descent, Webb himself fell to his death, unroped. Suicide or accident? No one can say. His secrets were buried with him in the ice. Chun survived after multiple surgeries, though she would never climb the same again. Her ordeal reshaped mountaineering safety, forever tamper evidence seals, stricter background checks, and heightened vigilance against threats from within. For Janae, the revelation ended her career. Once the guardian of ropes and anchors, she could no longer trust the very systems that climbing depended on. She turned to teaching rescue and law enforcement, carrying the bitter lesson with her. Sometimes, the mountain's deadliest threat isn't ice, or storms, or avalanches. It's the human standing right beside you. And Denali still had more horrors waiting to be told. July 8, 2022. Veteran rescue pilot Kendrick Powell made the most disturbing discovery of his career. In 13 years of flying missions, he had pulled survivors from crevasses, lifted broken bodies from avalanches, and braved storms few would dare enter. But nothing could have prepared him for this. A fully operational base camp. Tents intact. Food still cooking. Belongings scattered as if their owners had just stepped away. And not a single trace of the 6-person expedition that had called it home. At first, Kendrick thought he was hallucinating. From the cockpit, the camp below looked alive, neatly pitched tents, gear stacked, and even a stove still glowing faintly. But as his helicopter circled and landed, the chilling truth became undeniable. The climbers were gone. 6 people had vanished into thin air, leaving everything behind as if they had stepped out for only a moment. He radioed base command immediately. His voice, usually calm even in disaster, trembled as he described the scene. Camp intact. No damage. No signs of a storm, but no climbers. None. The retrieval team arrived hours later, combing every corner of the camp. Nothing suggested panic or retreat. Food was half prepared. Journals lay open mid-sentence, and ropes were still coiled neatly. There was no blood, no torn fabric, no avalanche tracks leading away. It was as though the mountain itself had swallowed the team whole. Investigators initially suspected a sudden storm had forced them out, but weather records showed clear skies for days. Another theory suggested crevasse collapse, that there were no tracks, no disturbed snow, no evidence that 6 experienced climbers had all fallen victim at once. The deeper the search went, the stranger it became. Satellite imagery was pulled. Drone sweeps scoured ridgelines and glaciers. Rescue dogs were flown in. Yet not a single clue emerged. Radios, GPS trackers, even emergency beacons were still in camp, untouched. For mountaineers, abandoning these items is unthinkable. It was like leaving behind your heartbeat. Little did anyone know, whispers of something darker soon began to circulate. Some locals claimed the team had been lured higher by lights on the ridge, strange, flickering glows that no natural phenomenon could explain. Others believed it was sabotage, pointing out that one member of the group, a wealthy corporate executive, had received death threats before the expedition. But investigators were not prepared for what came next. When family members reviewed recovered footage from the climbers' cameras, the last recordings revealed something chilling. On the final night at camp, the team sat laughing, eating, and planning the next day. Then, just before midnight, one climber aimed his camera toward the ridge. In the grainy darkness, distant lights flickered slow, deliberate, almost like lanterns moving in formation. The voices on the video grew uneasy. Someone whispered, "Do you see that?" Another replied, "It's getting closer." And then the footage cut out. No one knows who or what those lights belonged to. No bodies were ever found. To this day, the Denali disappearance remains one of the mountain's most disturbing mysteries, a case where neither nature nor logic could provide answers. For Kendrick Powell, the discovery haunted him. He had rescued survivors and recovered the dead. But this was worse. To land at a camp frozen in time, only to find 6 lives erased without explanation, left him with nightmares he could never shake. The mountain had kept its secrets. And it would not be the last time. Dark secrets of Denali surfaced. The Morrison expedition looked like a family dream written into snow and ice. Leading them was Robert Morrison, a 62-year-old oil executive who carried the pride of a patriarch determined to build a lasting family legacy. With him was his son, Michael, 34, a competitive athlete and seasoned climber. His daughter, Sarah, 28, a physician with limited high-altitude experience. And 2 close family friends, James Chun and David Park, both in their 40s. Experienced outdoorsmen, though untested above 14,000 feet. To guide them, the family hired Jacine Carter, a professional mountaineer with an untarnished reputation. 8 years guiding, 0 fatalities, and glowing reviews from every client she had ever led. They paid a premium for her services, believing her leadership would ensure their safety. But the Morrisons could not have known the chilling truth. Jacine's spotless safety record wasn't the product of skill. It was the result of meticulous planning. A secret career of carefully staged accidents had concealed her true nature. A predator hiding in plain sight. Her obsession with death had started innocently enough. An interest in the risks of mountaineering, the razor-thin line between life and loss. But fascination evolved into control. She discovered she could manipulate conditions, sabotage equipment, and orchestrate fatal accidents, all while appearing as the grieving, heroic guide. And with every tragedy, her reputation only grew stronger. The first warning signs came with Jacine's choice of route. Instead of the standard West Buttress, the safest option for a mixed experience team, she insisted on the notorious Cassin Ridge, a technically brutal climb with little margin for error. She claimed their athletic backgrounds made them more than capable, convincing the family it would be a grander, more exclusive achievement. Flattered and eager, the Morrisons agreed. Other guides quietly warned the route was reckless, but their concerns were dismissed. From the very start, Jacine began weaving her control. She demanded they trust her judgment alone, discouraging independent decisions, and even persuading them to limit satellite communication, claiming outside interference would weaken their authentic experience. Slowly, the group became isolated, vulnerable, and utterly dependent on her authority. Her first victim was James Chun. Strong, capable, and sharp, Chun posed the greatest threat to her plan. Before departure, Jacine tampered with his harness, covertly weakening it with chemical solvents. To the naked eye, it was flawless. Under the strain of a real fall, it would snap instantly. On June 13th, during a treacherous section of unstable ice, Jacine put Chun in the lead. Encouraged to move quickly, he climbed into fragile formations ready to collapse. When they gave way, Chun plunged nearly 40 feet. His sabotaged harness failed exactly as she had designed. He crashed into a crevasse and died on impact. The others were devastated, but Jacine's reaction sealed their trust. She wept, she organized, she pretended to fight for a rescue she knew would fail. To the survivors, she appeared a grieving protector, heartbroken yet determined to keep them safe. But safety was the last thing on her mind. Her next target was David Park, Chen's closest friend, now drowning in guilt. She twisted his grief, insisting Chen would have wanted him to finish the climb. Manipulated into taking the lead, Park unknowingly stepped into avalanche-prone terrain Jacine had deliberately chosen. When the slide hit, he was buried alive. Jacine's staged rescue stretched on just long enough to ensure he never resurfaced alive. 2 deaths in 3 days. The Morrison family was broken, traumatized, terrified, and clinging desperately to Jacine's authority. Exactly as she intended, but cracks began to form. Michael Morrison, strong-willed and perceptive, noticed patterns. Equipment failures, dangerous routes, risks that made no sense. He started questioning her judgment, a dangerous move that threatened her control. Jacine's solution was cruelly simple. Engineer a situation where Michael would die a hero. She led the group into the path of a storm she had deliberately timed. At 17,000 feet, battered by winds and snow, they were forced into a desperate rescue scenario. Anchors snapped, sabotaged like Chun's harness, and Michael fell to his death while trying to save his family. His sacrifice looked noble, but it was murder in disguise. With Robert Morrison broken and Sarah clinging to survival, Jacine planned her final act, the patriarch's death on descent. But Sarah, a physician, had grown increasingly suspicious. She discovered Jacine's hidden cache, chemical solvents, modified tools, and damning records of her past crimes disguised as expedition notes. At last, the mask slipped. Jacine confronted Sarah and her father with her delusion that she was an agent of natural selection, eliminating the weak to purify humanity. The confrontation turned violent at 14,000 feet. Jacine tried to kill them both, abandoning subtle sabotage for raw aggression. But fate intervened. Sarah used Jacine's own equipment against her. In the struggle, the murderous guide fell into a crevasse, meeting the same cold death she had dealt to others. Sarah was rescued, but the cost was unimaginable. Her father broken, her brother dead, her friends gone. And the world learned the truth. Jacine Carter was no hero, but one of America's most prolific serial killers, responsible for at least 12 murders disguised as mountaineering tragedies. The revelation sent shockwaves through the climbing world. For the first time, people realized the deadliest danger on the mountain not be avalanches, storms, or falls. It might be the very guide sworn to protect you. The case of Jacine Carter forced sweeping reforms in mountaineering oversight, certification, and client education. But for Sarah, no policy could erase the horror of discovering that their trusted leader had turned their dream into a nightmare. And as investigators would soon uncover, Denali's ice held even older, stranger secrets once buried for more than 40 years. The discovery would unravel one of the darkest investigations in Alaska's history, a story of betrayal, survival, and murder literally frozen in time. It began with the Arctic Heritage Expedition, a team retracing forgotten routes on Denali's remote north face. Their leader, David Chun, stumbled upon what looked like an abandoned camp tents, supplies, and tools that seemed decades out of date. Yet the frigid air had kept everything preserved with eerie perfection. Paper that hadn't yellowed, fabric intact, even traces of food untouched by time. But what lay inside the camp would shock them. Around a frozen stove sat 3 human bodies, perfectly preserved, faces visible, clothing intact, expressions frozen in their final moments of life. At first glance, they seemed recent, but their equipment told another story. These people had been dead for 40 years. The Alaska State Troopers dispatched forensic investigator Talon Rogers, a specialist in cold weather forensics. Even she was stunned. There was no decay, no scavenging. The victims looked almost alive. Documentation confirmed the truth. These were the long-lost members of the 1981 Peterson Geological Survey expedition, a research team that had vanished without a trace during a 3-week mission in Denali's unforgiving wilderness. Extensive searches at the time had failed, buried by the onset of winter storms. Families had waited decades without answers. Now, the mountain was finally giving up its dead. The bodies were identified as Dr. Harold Peterson, respected geologist, James Morrison, his graduate student, and Sarah Chun, a skilled cartographer and mountaineer. But one member was missing, Robert Hayes. The mystery deepened when forensic analysis revealed what the ice had preserved. Peterson bore skull fractures from repeated blunt force trauma. Morrison had defensive wounds on his arms and deep stab wounds across his chest. And Sarah Chun, her wrists and ankles, showed signs of restraint. Her injuries told a horrifying story: torture, degradation, and a deliberate display of cruelty. This was no climbing accident. It was a massacre. The camp itself revealed sabotage. Food was contaminated, equipment destroyed, valuables missing. And the recovered journals painted a terrifying picture of how the group had unraveled. At first, the notes detailed routine work. But as weeks passed, tension grew centered around Hayes. Peterson wrote of paranoia, hoarding, violent outbursts. His final entry described a planned confrontation with Hayes, fearing his mental state had become dangerous. Morrison's journal revealed Hayes's obsession with gold deposits they had uncovered, along with his belief that his teammates were plotting to steal the findings. And Sarah Chun's meticulous maps, hidden with coded notes, marked their exact location, an attempt, perhaps, to leave evidence in case they never returned. Hayes's background only fueled suspicions. A history of psychological instability. Military assault charges that have vanished on technicalities. Dismissals from jobs due to paranoia and aggression. Financial debts that gave him motive to claim the expedition's discoveries as his own. The reconstructed timeline was chilling. Hayes killed Peterson first. Morrison died trying to defend him. Chun endured days of torment before her brutal end. Hayes then gathered stolen research and equipment, attempting to escape. But the mountain turned against him. His body was later found 2 miles away, deep inside a crevasse. Evidence suggested he had survived the fall but slowly froze to death. Along with his stolen secrets, the ice had preserved every detail of his crimes. Forensic psychologists concluded Hayes had likely planned the murders long before the expedition, using isolation and the absence of communication to guarantee his dominance. For investigator Talon Rogers, the case was unlike anything she had ever faced. Perfectly preserved violence, perfectly preserved fear. Families finally had answers, but those answers carried unbearable weight. The frozen camp became a case study in forensic science. Every wound, every object, every entry frozen in time, an unprecedented look at the anatomy of a crime in the world's harshest environment. For the victims' families, closure came with unbearable grief. Decades of waiting had ended, but the brutality of the truth scarred them forever. And for the world, Denali's ice became a chilling reminder. The mountain doesn't just preserve beauty, it preserves horror. Evil, locked in time, waiting to be uncovered. As the case closed, new expeditions were warned. The deadliest threat in the wilderness isn't always the mountain itself. Sometimes, it's the darkness that a fellow human brings into the snow. But Denali's secrets were far from finished. The year 2021 would bring new discoveries and new nightmares. What none of her teammates could have foreseen was that Jalen Matthews' scientific brilliance would become both their greatest chance at survival and the instrument of their ultimate doom. In June 2021, 6 experts set out on the Denali climate research expedition, organized by the Arctic Studies Institute. Their mission: to collect high-altitude atmospheric data that could shape climate models for the entire continent. Jalen, a seasoned meteorologist, was joined by Dr. Robert Chun, a high-altitude physiologist; Sarah Martinez, a glaciologist; Dr. Eric Johansson, an atmospheric physicist; James Park, an elite mountain guide; and Lisa Thompson, a graduate student staking her dissertation on the success of the mission. The plan was simple, but dangerous: ascend to 19,500 feet, just below Denali's summit, establish a temporary research camp, collect 48 hours of data, then descend before the next storm cycle. Jalen's forecasts had identified a narrow weather window, but no model could have predicted what awaited them. On June 18th, the team reached their camp. Clear skies, light winds, a temperature of -10 degrees Fahrenheit, harsh but survivable. They began their work with confidence. Yet by nightfall, Jalen's instruments began to show anomalies. Barometric pressure plunging erratically, atmospheric instability rising fast. Her training told her the unthinkable. A storm unlike anything on record was forming directly over them. By June 19th, it struck. Later classified as a unique meteorological event, the storm fused elements of Arctic cyclones, high-altitude jet streams, and Denali's own weather systems. Winds screamed at over 150 miles per hour. Wind chills dropped below -100 degrees Fahrenheit. Visibility vanished. Their shelter, a specialized high-altitude tent, became both their refuge and their prison. Escape was impossible. Helicopters couldn't fly. Descent meant certain death. Jalen's models predicted the storm would last at least 5 days longer than their food and fuel. The countdown to survival had begun. The psychological toll set in almost immediately. Dr. Chun, despite his expertise, succumbed to high-altitude cerebral edema by the 4th night, dying quietly as his teammates watched helplessly. His frozen body, trapped inside the cramped shelter, became a silent reminder of what awaited the rest. By day 5, hypothermia claimed Sarah Martinez. Her confusion turned to delusion, and she tried to flee into the blizzard. Park dragged her back, but she died before dawn. Their food was gone, their fuel nearly exhausted. The 4 survivors now faced the unthinkable: cannibalism. Dr. Johansson, weakened and resigned, offered to sacrifice himself, arguing that his death might buy the others time. But his plea tore the group apart. Park demanded they draw lots. Thompson argued they should fight to the death rather than deliberately murder one of their own. Jalen, caught between science and despair, insisted the storm would break soon, even though her calculations showed otherwise. On the 7th day, fate intervened. Johansson died in his sleep before any decision was made. Hours later, the winds eased, the whiteout lifted, and rescue became possible. Helicopters finally reached the summit, pulling 3 broken survivors from the edge of death. The storm entered meteorological history as a once-in-a-century phenomenon, an atmospheric monster that defied science. The data collected before and during the event became invaluable to climate research, shaping new models for extreme weather. But the price of that knowledge was unbearable. The survivors carried scars no science could heal. Park battled survivors' guilt and recurring nightmares. Thompson developed crippling anxiety, triggered by cold and confined spaces. And Jalen, the brilliant forecaster whose models failed, was haunted most of all. She retired from active fieldwork, burdened by the belief that her miscalculation had led her friends into a death trap. For the families of Chun, Martinez, and Johansson, closure came at a devastating cost. Their loved ones had died not in accidents, but in a slow, merciless battle with nature and with the darkest choices humanity can be forced to face. The 2021 Denali summit storm remains one of the most terrifying survival ordeals ever documented. The mountain had trapped 6 of the world's best-trained researchers, reducing them to fear, desperation, and impossible decisions. Denali had proven once again that its greatest danger was not just its altitude, nor its cold, but its ability to strip away the very fabric of human morality, leaving only raw survival and the endless white. And for dark secrets, this storm revealed a truth as chilling as the mountain's winds. Sometimes, knowledge comes at the price of blood.